Welcome to E101, Environmental Management 101, where we are providing you information that is relevant for you and your colleagues to help understand environmental regulations. My name is Jennifer Collins, and I am the manager of the Pollution Prevention and Compliance Assistance section here at the Indiana Department of Environmental Management. And we have, this is number 5 of our webinar series this year. We are happy to be providing you information today on institutional controls and comfort letters. And some of you may know something about that already, and others of you may not have any idea of what we're talking about yet. So we hope that you learn from today's presenters, and it is our pleasure to bring them to you. I do want to thank Tracy Barnes of our Compliance and Technical Assistance staff who has really been working diligently on this to prepare and to pull together the speakers and all of the background administrative side of things today. And we will see her a little bit later on in the presentation. I do want to share with you the schedule here. Let's see if I can get this to you. Can you see that okay? Is it?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so we have starting off today, we are welcome and introductions. The next section will cover institutional controls. We'll take some time to answer any questions that you might have about that topic. Then we'll take a quick break from 2:10 to 2:25. We'll then come back and get into comfort letters and answer any questions that you might have about that process. And then we'll talk a little bit about our Compliance and Technical Assistance Program and then wrap up the day. So we are grateful that you're joining us today. We do have some general housekeeping advice, so please mute your microphone and keep your video off. We are just trying to focus on the speakers today. Provide your questions in the Zoom chat feature, and we will ask your questions to the presenters at the time of the Q&A session. And we will be recording, as I mentioned, and we will send you a link of the recording and your certificate for today's participation. So at this time, I would like to introduce Jim Walsdorf. He is an environmental manager at the Indiana Department of Environmental Management, Institutional Controls Group, and he has a, he graduated from Wabash College in Crawfordsville, majoring in biology. He has worked with several consulting firms in Indianapolis and has conducted ecological restorations and tree mitigations. His work with IDEM focuses on managing more than 3,000 institutional controls across the state, as well as outreach and education. So let me stop sharing here. And I'll invite Jim to share his screen with you all.
You want me to take it away?
Take it away. I think we
right.
still have some folks joining us. So just be reminded to keep yourself muted and off of video. Thank you for being here.
All right. If you want to go ahead and start the poll question for me. I'm not sure. There we go. Even I can vote in it. I'm going to say I'm an expert, so. Give everybody a couple minutes to go ahead and answer that. Tracy or Jennifer, how do I see the results of that?
Oh, so I think hopefully when I end the poll, the results will pop up.
Okay.
So just let me know when you want to cut it off. I can tell you right now, it seems like about half the people that have joined feel that they're experts or they use it frequently. Then another 40% use it frequently. And we got about 10% that aren't really very familiar.
Okay.
So that's where we are. It looks like it's kind of, 100% have answered. Let me end the poll and hopefully that'll pop up for us. Let's see.
Oh, awesome.
See
Okay.
that? All right.
So then this topic will be very informative to a lot of you, and hopefully I'm not repeating things that everybody already knows, and you will take something away from today and hopefully learn a little something. So like Jennifer said, my name's Jim or James Walsdorf. I'll answer to either. I worked with the Indiana Department of Environmental Management in the Office of Land Quality with the Institutional Controls Group. Okay. Here's a little overview of the presentation that I'm going to give today. Talk a little bit about the history of institutional controls in Indiana, the different types of institutional controls that we deal with, the informational tools that you can learn a little bit more information on, and just resources for you for when you do work with institutional controls. And a couple other things, just miscellaneous items that we're working on and can help you. So where this all started was when IDEM first started, cleanups were very conservative. You had to reach one number no matter what the future use of the site was. So this obviously made them very difficult to achieve and complete. So they were very expensive. So, and another issue with cleanups back before we started doing risk-based closure is not even all the contaminants had cleanup levels established. So this was definitely bad for property owners. So even if you wanted your property to be commercial industrial future use, you still had to clean up to what would be a residential level. So very expensive, bad for communities. Leaving vacant properties, leaving properties that weren't able to be reused or redeveloped. And it was bad for IDEM. We just had all these properties on our plate that we were unable to close. So using our resources for probably not the most important things. So what happened? House and Roll Act 1162 was passed. This is now referenced as Public Law 78, 2009. Basically, what this did was it allowed IDEM to consider risk-based closure for closing sites. As long as risk was managed and exposure pathways were dealt with and made incomplete, we were allowed to close sites and use environmental restrictive covenants and environmental restrictive ordinances in doing that risk-based closure. So this is better for property owners. So if you had a site that was not going to be used for residential use, you didn't have to reach that very strict residential number. Good for communities, these sites could be redeveloped and reused, and it was good for IDEM so that we were able to actually close sites and focus resources on more important things. So now I'm going to get into the meat of my presentation and talk to you about institutional controls. So from that poll, a lot of you already seem familiar with what institutional controls are. They're the legally, administratively enforceable documents that basically limit land use so that we're not exposing people to chemicals of concern. So the first type of institutional control that I'm going to talk about are the environmental restrictive covenants. Environmental restrictive covenants are legally binding IDEM enforceable documents. They're recorded on property deeds by the current property owner. So if you are leasing a property, you would not be the person to sign and record the ERC. It would have to be the property owner. They're attached to the deeds forever. That being said, the ERC is always attached to the deed. So there's always record that there was an ERC on it, but the restrictions may not be forever. And I'll talk about that a little bit more when I talk about modifications and terminations. So what the ERC does is that there is some kind of environmental contamination and is designed to eliminate those exposure pathways. So this is just giving you a look at how institution or environmental restrictive covenants have collected over the years. The green bar is 2009 when the public law was enacted. So after that, they have kind of exploded. We add probably about 100-ish new ER, and all of those in the institutional controls registry, which I'll talk more later on. But yeah, just kind of giving you a visual of what this looks like and how it changed since 2009. So this is the Indiana code that defines restrictive covenants. I'm going to read this word for word for all of you. So, no, I'm just kidding. I just wanted to give you this definition so that you can see in this next slide. We have an environmental restrictive covenant template on our website. There's changes coming to that, which I will talk about more later on in the presentation as well. But this is how each one of those things in the law is laid out in the environmental restrictive covenant template. So as you can see, limit land use restrictions or limit land use activities. That's obviously in the restrictions. So we want these are intended to be protective over the long term. So some chlorinateds are going to be around for many, many years. So that's why we want to make sure that the restrictions run with the land, and that if property ever changes hands, that the future property owners are also bound to the restrictions in the environmental restrictive covenant. Take a drink real quick, sorry. Also, it needs to list the county recorder's office that it's recorded in, and that's done throughout the document. There's multiple different areas where the county is referenced. And then I was talking about modifications and terminations a little earlier, and I will get more in depth in them later, but that happens in paragraph 10. Grants access to the department. So the department needs to make sure that these land use restrictions are being enacted and still being protective. So access for the department is very important. And then requires notice of transfer of land. So we just want to make sure that anytime these properties are changing hands, that the new property owner is aware that there's an environmental restrictive covenant on it, and then also identifies where you can locate these documents. You can find them. You can come to our office if you want to on the 11th floor. More than happy to meet with you. But as we get more into the virtual world, that might not be possible. So we do have a link to the VFC website where there's millions and millions of documents for every site, but I can definitely help you navigate that to find exactly where the environmental restrictive covenant for a site that you're interested in would be. Or I'll talk about the registry a little bit more later. There's a link in the registry to where you can see these environmental restrictive covenants. Okay, so if you have an ERC that has a hazardous waste that is regulated by any one of these numerous regulations, I'm not going to read them all, but there are additional requirements, and those additional requirements are, it has to the extent feasible, describe the identity, quantity, and location of every hazardous substance, where it was at on the property. And the easiest way to do this is with a map attached to the ERC that would have points or just defined areas where the hazardous waste or substance was. Okay, so as I was talking about the change of ownership earlier, this is the statute that requires the current property owner to tell the new owner that there is contamination on the property. Also, section 2, paragraph 6, notice to the department of the change in property. We want to know who the current property owner is so that you know, when we do need to get access to that site, we know who to get in touch with. And then in the notice to the department, we list out what we're looking for. And then also there is, in the environmental restrictive covenants, there's a notice, the bold notice section to give to the property owner that's buying the property. So ERCs do require IDEM review for closure. If you're trying to get closure, so that being said, there's nothing stopping somebody from putting restrictions on their property. But if they want closure through IDEM, we have to approve the restrictions to make sure that they are protected. And this is table 12A from the remediation closure guide. This is a really handy table that lists all the different types of restrictions, the exposure pathways of those when there's contamination in those certain areas, and also gives you handy use when and consider when categories for each one of those restrictions. So as you can see, these are the land use restrictions broken down by each ERC. Groundwater use and residential use definitely dominate it. Residential use is really high because when ERCs were first becoming a thing, it was kind of a default to put a residential use restriction on a property. We're moving away from this. We're working with property owners more and more so that there can potentially be redevelopment. So maybe instead of automatically going towards a residential use restriction, we'll look for other things such as engineering controls, engineered barriers, or caps and covers and things like that. So this is just a special note about affected areas. So an ERC applies to the entire deed. It's for the whole real estate as defined by the legal description in the deed. That being said, certain land use restrictions can be applied to defined areas of the ERC. And what will need to happen is when you draft an ERC, you'll have to swap out some of the real estate language for affected area. So that way that it's defined that the restrictions are only applying to an affected area. And then these areas need to be defined somehow. You can either do legal survey or what's probably easier is having a map with GPS coordinates on it and defining that area that way. So this is kind of the process. This is an abbreviated version of the process for closing a site with an ERC. You're going to work with your IDEM PM. And I want to make a quick note here that in the remediation services branch, you'll work with state cleanup, petroleum remediation section, or voluntary remediation program. But then if you're working with brownfields, they draft and they do their ERCs on their end, but then we still track them in our registry. So you'll work with your PM, either the IDEM PM or the brownfields, and we have a handy template found on the IC webpage where I'll show you where that's at later. And then filling in the appropriate information, you'll send that in for IDEM review. We'll have our risk services section look at it. We'll have our GIS people look at it to make sure that the legal description plots correctly and that the land use restrictions in the ERC are protective enough for the contamination that's left on the property. We'll send back a draft copy with our comments. Then we would like to see the final draft after the changes have been made based on IDEM comments. And then we'll give you final approval, and then you will record the ERC. Well, the property owner will record the ERC and sign that. And then what do you do with it? So we do keep a record of all recorded ERCs in the state. That's why it is very important for you to send them back into us after they're recorded. You can send a hard copy or an email to your IDEM PM or the institutional controls email. Just if you do send it to the institutional controls email, make sure that you are CCing the project manager that you worked with, just so that they're aware that the ERC actually got recorded and you're moving along in getting that site closed, either with a NFA, comfort letter, or covenant not to sue. Okay, and then I spoke briefly about this earlier, talking about modifications and terminations. So if a property owner wants to change the land use restrictions on the property, this could be for a multitude of things. We do modifications for various reasons. We have done modifications to add additional restrictions to a property if there's an additional release after they have one ERC recorded. And then also if there is a change in science or technology that makes the restrictions that are on the property too restrictive and the property owner wants to get some of them off, they can fill out state form 56082, and there's a whole state form page on the Indiana Gov website and the IDEM website there's a link from our webpage that will take you to the state form that you need to fill out. But then you'll fill out that state form, provide us with a draft ERC modification. We also have a template for that on our webpage. We do cost recover on modifications at $75 an hour. And then the modified ERC will be sent back to the property owner after it's signed by our assistant commissioner, and then they'll sign it and record it. And we would like you to send us a recorded copy back for our records. And then we do terminations, and then that's when a property meets unrestricted residential redevelopment. So that means that all the residual contaminations on the site are below the residential screening level. This also requires pretty much the same process of the modification, because what a termination is essentially is a modification of all the restrictions to no restrictions. So even though an ERC is terminated or modified, there will be a record of the original ERC on that property's deed. And that'll let a property owner know that there was contamination on the site. Now that contamination is below residential levels, so that it is good for residential redevelopment. Then the last change to an ERC can be a scrivener's error. This will be noticed. A minor error can be noticed after an ERC is recorded. So that can be, there was supposed to be a map and somehow it got left off when it got recorded at the recorder's office, or defining an affected area, or not defining an affected area in the restrictions, or misidentification of owners or property address. These require corrections via an affidavit. I really want to point out the affected area part on this. If in the restrictions, if you want the ERC to only apply to an affected area, but you put real estate in the restrictions, by definition, all the restrictions are going to still apply to real estate. Take another quick drink, sorry. A lot of talking. Okay, now the second type of institutional control that I'm going to talk about is environmental restrictive ordinances. What these are is they are municipally passed ordinances that control groundwater use. This can be for a variety of reasons, and I'll get into them a little bit more here. So, like I said, they are developed and passed by local municipalities, and they can be for a number of reasons. They can be to address contamination, or they can just be a requirement to hook up to a new municipal water supply. But again, an ERO is only for restricting groundwater use. It's not for any other reason. And then the third type of institutional control that I'm going to get into are deed notices. So these are basically informational documents that are recorded on deeds. They're used for solid waste landfill closures. They used to be used in older VRP documents, and they are also attached to the deed forever. This is what a deed notice looks like. That's just the notice of what deed it is being recorded on. That is defining that the property was an open dump from certain dates. And this is the most important thing. So when dumps are and solid waste facilities are closed, they're capped and covered. And what these deed notices are is they are notice that you cannot break that cover for any reason. You can't install anything on that property that would break that cover. Okay, now to summarize everything I just talked about a little bit. Environmental restrictive covenants, they're the responsible party is the private property owner. So even if that property changes hands, it's going to be the next property owner that is responsible that the restrictions are still being upheld. And then for environmental restrictive ordinances, the municipality is responsible for enforcement and making sure that the restrictions are accurate on that. And then deed notices, again, that's another private property owner. Enforcement, ERCs are item enforceable, and then EROs are not item enforceable, but the municipality will have some kind of penalty restriction in that. So usually they have fines in there if you violate the ERO. And then the deed notice, there is no enforcement, but there is that restriction that you cannot break that cap or cover. The duration of an ERC is forever. Environmental restrictive ordinances can be revoked by the municipality, but so they are effective until they are
Jim,
revoked. Yes.
I think your sound has cut out.
Oh,
You can
no.
hear me.
Can you hear me?
It's been clear on my side.
Sounds good.
I can hear you, Jim.
Okay. All right. Are we good to go?
We're good.
Okay. All right. And then deed notices are also on the property deed forever. So land use restrictions for an ERC are site dependent. So it's all going to just depend on the contamination that's on the site. Environmental restrictive ordinances are only for groundwater. And then deed notice is again for excavation of any kind. Environmental restrictive covenants are again for a single deed. Environmental restrictive ordinances are for entire municipalities or multiple properties that can be defined in that ERO. And then again, deed notice is just for a single deed. All of these have different ways of imposing strict restrictions, but they all are looking to achieve the same goal of eliminating exposure to contamination. So then a couple not quite institutional controls are administrative control areas and then points of exposure controls or engineering controls. Administrative control areas are a county health officer, that's again for groundwater use. They define a contaminated area that they have determined that you can't use the groundwater there for whatever reason. And then point of exposure controls and engineering controls directly eliminate an exposure pathway. So administrative control areas they're very similar to an ERO. Again, basically just what I said, eliminates installation and use of water wells to protect public safety in any way that happens. One quick thing about these is they're basically the only place that we know about them right now is St. Joseph County. The county health officer there enforces these as well. And then point of exposure controls. These are anything intended to eliminate direct exposure pathways, usually require long-term maintenance. And then they're not generally associated with ERCs, but these are the things: bottled water, carbon filters, vapor mitigation systems for offsite impact, and then any physical barriers. So the informational tools where you can find more information about institutional controls are the institutional control webpage. We do have updates to that coming soon. We are rolling out a new environmental restrictive covenant template. That'll be coming soon. It hasn't been posted yet. We do have a GIS map of restricted sites on our webpage, and then the institutional controls registry where we do track all of our environmental restricted covenants. So these are the proposed ERC template changes. Like I said, since the public law passed in 2009, their ERCs are a very common path of closure. I would say the majority of sites closing in the remediation service branch are closing with ERC. And then there has not been many meaningful changes to that template language since ERCs became common use. So these are the, go back. Sorry about that. So these are the proposed changes. We want to make one template, one uniform template, so that there's no confusion about, hey, my site's in such and such program, which template should I use? So we're going to eliminate that confusion by merging them all into one template, and then there will be options to choose for what citation should be included in the second whereas paragraph of those. Then we're adding additional language in the third whereas paragraph to show that we have GIS defined areas, polygons for these sites, and where to locate that information. So similarly to the link for VFC, we'll have this link in those documents as well. And then also we're going to add some new restriction language that will include VFC citations for soil management plans and ongoing monitoring maintenance plans. The reason why we're including VFC references to these documents and not including them as exhibits in ERCs is, if there's ever a change required to a soil management plan or an ongoing monitoring maintenance plan, it's much easier to change it and then cross-reference virtual file cabinet numbers so that they all show up when they're searched, and not have to do, because alternatively, if there was a change and they were an exhibit, we would have to do an affidavit to correct a scrivener's error, which is a much more complicated process and would require recording a new document. And, sorry, there's this bar up top there. There we go. Okay, and then we're removing that disinterested witness language. If you worked on ERC in 2020, you'll know that there was disinterested witness language in the whereof, in the witness whereof section. And this was because there was a law that changed an or to an and. So this was required in any recorded document, but now it's not any longer. So now we can just all remove that and make things a little bit easier. And then an added request for easement searches. So responsible parties will need to do a title search to make sure that there aren't any easements on their property that would conflict with land use restrictions. Most likely, these would conflict with subsurface utilities. So if there is a restriction on the property that limited excavation, but there's an easement on that same property with subsurface utilities, we will need to show those on a site map. And then the Office of Legal Counsel will get a subordination clause for that responsible party. So from the easement holder, that will help with those conflicts of land use restrictions. Okay, so this is the GIS map of restricted sites that's available on the Institutional Controls webpage. I also want to make a note right here. We do have, IDEM has an interactive map with all the sites for the Office of Land Quality. It's an interactive map, part of the What's in My Neighborhood. So these are the restricted sites in downtown Indianapolis, and you could notice that there's two different colors. Same with the other interactive map, there will be two different color polygons, and I'll explain what each one of those colors means. First, you'll notice the yellow polygons that I've circled here. So when we have an ERC come in, a recorded ERC come back in, we'll change the color to orange. I guess I should have put that first. We'll change the color to orange, and that's just that the area has an institutional control recorded, but the area hasn't been verified. So there's a two-step verification for ensuring that the legal description in these ERCs is accurate. And the yellow ones are the ones that have gone through that second step of verification. And then, like I said, the orange polygons are ones that have an institutional control recorded, but haven't gone through that second step of verification. Very rarely do we see sites with recorded ERCs needing a change after the document is recorded, and a change to the legal description after the document is recorded. That's why it's very important to send in your draft ERCs before they get recorded, so that we can verify the area that they've been recorded on. So when you go ahead and click on one of these polygons, there will be a little pop-up block that comes up. And then if you click on the box in the upper right-hand corner of that pop-up block, it'll give you a whole bunch more information about that property. It's going to give you the facility ID. It'll give you the common name of the facility, where it's located, the regulatory program, the closure type, the institutional control type, and then also it will give you just a generic control methods, as well as the affected medium and the contaminants of concern. And then if you look down, you can also see there's the VFC ID number and also the VFC URL. So if you go ahead and you click on that, the thing that says more info, it will pull up the entire environmental restricted covenant. So this layer is able to stream to other GIS systems. I'm not really sure on the technical side of that, but if you are interested in that, you can reach out to us either through the institutional controls email, or my contact information will be at the end of this presentation. You can go ahead and reach out to me. So I'm not sure who all is on this presentation, but if you deal with any health department officials or anybody making building permit decisions or things like that, let them know about this, because it will really help them make better health decisions about their communities, so that, you know, they aren't approving residential developments on a property that restricts residential use. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the Institutional Controls Registry. Like I said, we track all of the recorded ERCs in the state of Indiana. And as well, we have the solid waste sites, which are the closed landfills across Indiana. The registries identify the restricted properties. They also have a link to Indiana map. I would advise, we have better GIS information and spatial information through IDEM than Indiana map does. When these registries were created, that was the best we had, but now we have better, and we're working on updating these registries so that they link to our internal GIS information as opposed to Indiana map. And then again, they link directly to the institutional controls documents in the virtual file cabinet. And then also there's an Excel spreadsheet that combines all of the sites, and that can be used to sort the information for whatever purpose you might want to do that for. And then these are pretty up to date. We do our best. We update them the first Monday of every month on the IC webpage. We would like it to be instantaneous, but we aren't there yet. So again, this is what the Institutional Controls Registry looks like. There are 2,688 properties restricted in Indiana. That's the number of properties restricted. There are more ERCs than properties because some properties might have multiple environmental restrictive covenants. It's a PDF document, so it's searchable but not sortable. So you can just Control F search on it to find a property that you're interested in. So it's sorted by county, and then you'll see the site names here, and then the address is over here. It's pretty easy to go ahead, and if you wanted to know about Clark Oil and Refining, to just Control F search that. Or if you knew the address of a site, you can easily do that as well. So then you also see, these gives you kind of a quick snapshot like the pop-up block does on the map. It'll show you the effective medium, and then also the contaminant. You can see this one is contaminated with petroleum, which makes sense. It was a Gas America, so it's a gas station. And then also the land use restrictions for this site. And then once again, like I said, there's a link to the Indiana map, but we internally at IDEM have better GIS services for you. And then you can open the whole document in VFC. And then this is just the solid waste registry. There's this one grows at a much slower pace than say the Institutional Controls Registry does. We add about 100 more properties a year to the Institutional Controls Registry, and you can see that the solid waste registry, there is only 104 total. And this is just a breakdown of the Institutional Controls Registry by program. As you can see, well, I have Lust on here, but it's really the petroleum remediation section now. They dominate the amount of restricted properties, followed by brownfields, and then VRP and state cleanup are pretty close, and then there's a mix of the other ones. So yeah, like I said, there are 3,000 plus ERCs in both of the ICU registries, and that was in July. So I'm sure there are at least a couple new ones in there now. So a couple of the other things that I wanted to talk about today are number one, the self-auditing program. So as of this year, the institutional control group is looking to implement the self-auditing of environmental restricted covenant sites. The goal is to reach 20% of these ERC restricted properties this year. So just doing some quick math, that's about 600 properties. So the process of this, so for any consultants or attorneys that have worked with property owners to put ERCs on their sites, if they get a letter from us requesting them to perform a self-audit, they might reach out to you to help them out with that. So we just want to make you aware to just help them out, let them know to fill out that, fill out the self-audit checklist. And then this is, which is a state form. And then this is just gonna allow IDEM as a whole to determine compliance with restrictions and obligations of the ERC, and potentially can make a property owner aware of a recorded ERC, even though that there is supposed to be a notice to property owners when they get when they transfer a property, they are supposed to get notice from the previous property owner of the recorded ERC. So, but that it's not always perfect. So here is what the self-audit checklist will look like. This, we want them to fill out the property information. So just the how it was identified as it was going through one of the remediation services branch or brownfields closure. And then it will also get the information of the property owner, when their ERC was recorded, and then get all that information about that. It will also ask them to identify the land use restrictions, and then some additional questions about the property use, if there was an environmental or engineering control on the site, and then some other various information. And then they will go ahead and get that all filled out. And then there is technically a third page of this, but on the third page, it's just a signature block and date. So they'll go ahead and sign that and send that back in to us to verify that the land use restrictions are being upheld. The next kind of miscellaneous thing that I wanted to talk about is long-term stewardship. So site can enter into long-term stewardship through an agreed order with the Indiana Department of Environmental Management. Long-term stewardship is going to be a pretty involved process that will ensure that there is financial assurance, and there will be money to carry out the stewardship for however many years. It's going to be on the responsible party to provide that. then these long-term stewardship plans can involve physical and legal controls, so engineering controls and institutional controls. Also, it's going to involve who is going to implement it, which will be on the responsible party to ensure that. Also, information and data management systems. There's probably going to be some ongoing monitoring, so ensuring that properties are properly collecting that information and it's getting sent into us. And just making sure that the site is going to remain protective of human health and the environment, because that is really the big goal of all this stuff. So that's all that I have. I went a little shorter than my time, but I'm sure nobody will complain about getting some of their afternoon back if we wrap up a little bit earlier, but it just means we have more time for questions right now. So we can get that started.
Yes, we can. We do have several that came in while you were speaking. Let me get to the first one. Okay, from Steve Innes. For deed notice, James indicated that excavation of any kind was prohibited forever. What if there are issues that require environmental investigations or remediation, such as methane gas wells or GW cutoff wall?
So there will always be exceptions to these things. I'm sorry I spoke absolutely, but if there are things that are required for the remediation or for the closure to remain protective, obviously those things will be allowed. Those kind of activities will be allowed.
Okay, great. And I have another question from El Carrillo. If there is no enforcement for deed notices, then what recourse would an aggrieved party have if a deed notice is violated?
That is a really good question, and I'm not 100% sure on the answer of that, but Jennifer, I'm not really sure if you can
I can copy
somehow,
that question for you and you can
yeah,
answer
and
it.
collect their contact information, and I can find an answer for it.
Sure.
Can I
Yes.
add a thought on that? Sorry, Tracy here, just sticking my nose in. You know, and I suppose it depends on what it is. One of the things that you mentioned, Jim, was closed landfills. And that kind of caught my eye. And I was thinking, well, if someone has an approved closure plan through IDEM, it's possible that there may be a mechanism for enforcing the closure plan, even if it isn't going through the deed notice. So there may be some other circumstances, but
Yeah,
I think that was Leo. So yeah, we'll look into getting him a better answer, but that was just one of my initial thoughts, was that there may be other avenues depending on what it is.
okay, thank you.
Okay. And we had another question from S. Fisher. If a city has a water use restriction ordinance process in place, and Kokomo, in parentheses, Kokomo has a well restriction overlay district in their zoning ordinances, would we need to do both an ERO and well restriction overlay district, or would it be one or the other?
That's another really good question. So you would have to reach out to Kokomo to get their permission to use any kind of ordinance that they have, because it might not be specific. Like, so if it wasn't passed for contamination or something like that, they might not want it used for contamination. So yeah, it would just depend on what the municipality said.
Okay. Thank you. And we do have a couple other questions
Good questions.
from, let's see, if an ERC has been recorded on a property deed, but that property is later platted and subdivided, do the subdivided parcels need to retain the ERC if they do not contain the affected area discussed in the ERC?
Oh, man. So, um, so there would be still a record that that is a tough one, because there would still be a record that there was an ERC on that property deed, even though it was subdivided. But if so, all right, so if there is an affected area and then they subdivide that property and part of the subdivision doesn't have any of that affected area, by definition, the restrictions wouldn't apply to the part of the property that didn't have an affected area. But on another note, if the land use restrictions were applied to the entire property and then the property was subdivided, the land use restrictions would apply to both subdivisions. But if one of the subdivisions, there was additional monitoring or sampling done and it was proven that there wasn't contamination in one of the subdivisions, they could definitely modify or terminate the ERC for that subdivision.
Okay, great. We have another question from Marty Ryan. Can you say a few words about environmental notices for public right-of-ways? Is IDEM considering preparing a template, a registry?
So we are working with NDOT. We do, so when sites close through IDEM and there is contamination in the right-of-way, the project manager will let NDOT know, and then NDOT tracks all of the areas where there is contamination in the right-of-way. And they've actually shared that information with us. I hope that helps answer that question. I'm not sure about, did they say something about a template?
A template, yes. Are we preparing a template or have a registry for that?
I don't know if we have that in the works as of right now, but I can ask around a little bit and maybe get a little bit better answer for that.
Okay, I've recorded that question as well.
Awesome.
And also from Marty, does IDEM plan to require an ERC for groundwater use even if the property is included within an ERO? I have seen this requested by IDEM recently.
So yes, so because the municipality could have that ERO for a reason that does not contain contamination. And if the groundwater contamination from the spill for the property is just contained by that one property boundary, we do want to get an ERC for that, because the ERC is IDEM enforceable, whereas that ERO is not. And that ERO could potentially get revoked by the municipality. Then there's no longer protection for that groundwater contamination, and essentially the site would probably have to be reopened.
Okay. Very good, thank you. Also, Marty has a question. Does IDEM see a role for ERCs or modified deed notices to replace post-closure care plans for solid waste landfills nearing the end of their 30-year post-closure care periods?
Yes, I am 99% sure that ERCs are taking the place of deed notices in when they're getting close to those.
Great, thank you. We have another question from Chris Burrows, I believe. Are modifications to existing ERCs common, and do they automatically trigger a review of the existing ERC? If deficiencies are found in the previously recorded ERC, who is responsible for addressing them?
So hopefully there would never be any deficiencies found in an existing ERC, because we try to prepare. An ERC is meant to be for the long term. So when we do any kind of risk assessment on those, we do it with the future in mind. So hopefully, like I said, there wouldn't be any deficiencies, but if there was an additional release or something like that, then that, I guess you could call that a deficiency, but then we would be doing a modification for a different reason. Yeah, I hope that answers that question.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry.
Chris, can you let us know if that answers your question?
Yeah, sorry, I can come off mute here. Can you hear me?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, James. That answers it generally. So we did have a situation where there was an ERC from a previous release unrelated to our site release. So when we were looking at modifying it, it came up that the affected area wasn't very well defined in that original ERC. So we're kind of working with the property owner to address it. But I was just curious if that was something that had come up before.
No, not to my knowledge, no.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. We do have another question from Jamie. How will long-term stewardship plans be enforced?
Ooh, so I will get with Lynette Schroe on that. She is the long-term stewardship expert for the institutional controls group. So I will get that question to her and have her get additional information to Jamie.
Okay. I've got it recorded. Are there
This
any
is great.
other are there any other questions for Jim? Okay. Fantastic. Okay, one more. How can we help items speed up your review time besides trying to get it right the first time?
Well, that would definitely help a lot. Usually, I mean, if there is if there is like a circumstance where a property is in the process of getting sold or changing hands, and the ERC needs to get recorded before the new property owner would want to finish purchasing it, just let your project manager know. We do, I mean, we do try to be accommodating for circumstances like that. But yeah, just try to get them right the first time. That really helps. And then, yeah, just that's about all I can think of. I'm sorry.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Jim, for your presentation. I don't have any other questions. Oh, we do have another one that just came in. Can you further explain the Scrivener's note, i.e. to Chris Burrows' point, if an original ERC has an affected area definition issue, could we go this route instead of terminating original?
Yes, yes, that is kind of exactly what these Scrivener's errors are for. So like an example would be, you know, if you sent in a map that had just a square on it that was supposed to be the affected area, but that square wasn't defined by GIS coordinates, then we would definitely do a scrivener's error for something like that. So yeah, that would be the much easier route than getting a new ERC recorded and then terminating the original ERC.
Great. Sounds good. Okay. All right. Thanks, Jim, for your presentation.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
And we will make sure that Jim gets these questions and follows up with each one of you who have their follow-up questions. And now is the time for a 15-minute break. So go ahead and come back at 1:55. We'll see you at 1:55 Eastern. And enjoy your break. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. And we'll go ahead and get started here. Let me make sure I can get to Michelle. So we have Michelle Ordle here with us, and she's been working on brownfields for almost 30 years. And she's contributed to the creation and administration of the state's brownfields program. She's currently employed by the Indiana Finance Authority as the Federal Funding and Community Relations Coordinator for the Indiana Brownfield Program. And prior to that, she worked for the Indiana Department of Environmental Management for 16 years. She was an senior environmental manager at IDEM, and she coordinated US EPA funded assessments, technical oversight of state and federally funded brownfield projects, and document reviews for liability determinations, as well as participated in outreach activities for the brownfields program. She served on several national, state, and local brownfield work groups and committees, and she's worked as a project manager for brownfield sites, and earlier in a career with the IDEM Superfund pre-remedial site investigation program. So she has conducted site assessments for potentially hazardous waste sites throughout Indiana. And she is a 1987 graduate of Indiana University Bloomington and received a Bachelor's of Science degree in Public Affairs with a concentration in environmental science. I'm going to turn it over to Michelle. Let me stop sharing the screen. And
Hey, thank you, Jennifer. I will just talk because James is kind enough here to set me up with the technology and get my presentation. Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate being included in this important discussion about ICs, and thanks to James and Tracy and Jennifer for including me. Thank you. And I, as Jennifer said, my name is Michelle Erdl with the Indiana Brownfields Program. And just as a point of context, we are a state program and we are voluntary, and we are have free assistance, and we address the environmental issues associated with brownfields and basically offer incentives to address those, such as financial and legal incentives, in order to facilitate redevelopment. So just to give you a snapshot where I'm coming from before I launch into comfort letters. And so the legal aspect of our assistance regarding comfort letters is what I'll focus on today, and really just wanted to highlight the program as requested to be an example of how ICs can be utilized, how the ICs are part of our comfort letters, and which are primarily used for property transfers, and basically help the developers understand what they can and can't do in order to be safe. And so we want to basically make sure everyone's doing the right thing and moving forward toward redevelopment. So I will, let's see, go to the next slide. No, I'm going to stay right there for 1 second, sorry. Again, just focusing on the legal assistance comfort letters. The goal is to help you get more comfortable, hopefully, in this short presentation with comfort letters, if you haven't already had familiarity with our program. And I want to talk about what they are and what they're not a little bit, and just kind of show you how those can help with property transactions and redevelopment. I do want to give a caveat, that's why I wanted to stay on this first slide, that I am not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV or on Zoom or otherwise. So any lawyers out there, if I say something that makes you cringe, please forgive me. So we will go ahead and move forward. So again, with the large audience that it's which is great. It's great we're reaching so many of you. I'm not quite sure how familiar folks are with brownfields. I don't want to belabor, but I do want to, just as a starting point, have this slide up just to say, you know, on paper, blah, 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 right? That's what it looks like, a lot of words. But we're just basically talking about real estate that's been inactive, underutilized. It's has a perception of environmental issues where people just don't want to deal with it because they're afraid. They're afraid of costs, they're afraid of liability. And it's kind of the whole point of our program is to level the playing field with non-brownfield sites and help folks get more comfortable with them and address those environmental issues specifically. And this is in reality what a brownfield could look like, a typical brownfield, not all brownfields. Obviously, this is a former industrial site and there can be commercial properties. They can be in urban areas and rural areas, small, large. Most every community has a gas station at the corner that likely is abandoned, was abandoned. I think people probably, most communities have brownfields and they may not even be aware of it because they don't use that terminology. But if it's that rundown piece of property that you drive by every day and sure wish somebody would clean it up and or even better, redevelop it, repurpose it, do something with it, then these are the kind of properties we're talking about. And this is where our program tries to help primarily communities. And I'll get into the details of the comfort letters as one resource where we can help. So again, our program is housed under the Indiana Finance Authority, and just want to have a visual for folks to see how we're structured. But the main thing is that we work in partnership with EPA and of course IDEM. I didn't put that on the slide, but we can't really do anything without IDEM in the sense of environmental issues because IDEM is the state environmental authority on that. And so you'll see later, I'll talk about the letters and how they're structured. And James is just a floor away. So IDEM, we're partners. So it's an interesting structure how we are because we do have IDEM project managers in our program and IFA, Indiana Finance Authority. And so we just all work well together and do what we need to do. So that's just a little visual, again, to start to give you the big picture of how we fit in. We are not necessarily a regulatory program. Of course, we use existing laws, regulations, and policies as we would need to for the environmental issues that we address. There is no cost to be in our program, and we're typically not dealing with responsible parties that cause the contamination. And the main thing, and I don't know if it's highlighted in brown on what you can see, but property transfers and our financing are the kind of the key focus of the workload that we have. And so for the purposes of this presentation and the connect the dots with ICs, I'm going to be talking about property transfer and the comfort letters that are often requested to facilitate those transfers in order to facilitate redevelopment. So I've listed here the different kind of assistance we offer. But again, we don't have the time and it's a little outside of the purpose. So we're just gonna try to focus on the legal type assistance. And also showing the different programs we coordinate with, primarily whether it's the technical issues, financial, and legal. So even if it's not something coming directly out of our program, there's a lot of coordination to help folks move forward with the redevelopment process. So let's see, make sure I'm on track here. So we'll go here to the comfort letter slide itself. And these are basically like liability interpretation letters, if I could simplify it. And these, as is our program, there's no cost to the letters. There is no cost specifically to request these or receive these. And we're basically dealing with folks that qualify for an existing applicable exemption or liability defense in Indiana law or an IDEM policy, such as the contaminated aquifer policy, which I won't get into in detail. There's so much here. So I'm really going to try to simplify and condense things. But the main point is our comfort letters, while super valuable to the outside, according to the feedback we get, are not legal release of liability. So if knowing what you're requesting ahead of time, knowing the timelines, knowing what it is and what it isn't, will help stakeholders navigate maybe which programs or what type of resources to use. So we are basically interpreting, like I said, existing liability exemptions. And of the list that I have there, the bona fide prospective purchaser is the main, through the all appropriate inquiry EPA rule, is the main type of defense that our letters focus on. Others come through our doors and there might be different processes, but just that's the bulk of them, and that's what we feel are also most effective. So so the next slides will focus on those. So I have so much information I want to share, and yet I want to keep on focus and keep within the time frame. So here's where we're getting into connecting the dots with the ERCs that James so very thoroughly explained. And so there's a lot, I won't get into those details, but I want to help connect the dots as far as how they fit into our comfort letters. So these liability interpretation letters that stakeholders, not responsible parties, typically would request before they generally purchase a property, they can have an environmental restrictive covenant. There's an if in there. Maybe not always necessarily, but often. And I believe, as James said, they do need to be recorded in the respective county recorder's offices. So these letters are coming, the requests are coming through our Indiana Brownfields program. And as you can see on the last bullet, we're talking about recording your IDEM approved ERC. Well, basically it's on IDEM letterhead. The letters are on IDEM letterhead. The whole process, review process, goes through our program, and ultimately IDEM signs off on them. And so that might be where there's some confusion as to where these letters fit in. But because they're brownfields, they go through our program, because IDEM's the environmental authority and stakeholders want to know what IDEM thinks and did they do the right thing, then the value of the comfort letter is on that IDEM letterhead. So we, as I said earlier, the stakeholders come to us and request these. So we evaluate a lot of information. There's a request form. Well, let's see, I think I might get into the logistics of that in a little bit later. So for now, this is where ERCs fit into the comfort letters. Like I said, there's so much information, I kind of get excited about talking about what's next, what's ahead. So the BFPP, the bona fide prospective purchaser, this is the defense, and it's based on AAI, which is all appropriate inquiry rule, EPA rule. And the requirements, so the phase 1 environmental site assessment based on ASTM standards, there was the 13 version and an anticipated one this year to be revised, follows those AAI requirements. So if you're looking at phase 1s and you want to see if they follow AAI, look to see what kind of ASTM standards are followed. And that's what we focus on. So with the BFPP defense, there are two parts, and there's the due care, the due diligence, excuse me, and the due care. So the phase 1 is where the due diligence comes into play, if we want to really simplify this. And the phase 2 is the due care part of the all appropriate inquiry rule. So one, you want to make sure, let's say before you buy a property, you want to know what's there. You want to make sure you're not held liable. So you do have a consultant do the phase 1 and do this before you purchase it. And then having a phase 2 gives you that much more information to know, okay, what do I do once I purchase it and make sure I'm not going to exacerbate contamination. It's just that more the more information we have, you have, stakeholders have, the better we can move forward with telling you what can be done and what can't be done, whether ERCs are necessary or not, and how those are spelled out. So I think that's enough on that one. So the phase one is super important. And what's also super important is to understand the timing of it, some of the requirements. If you come into our program and request a comfort letter with the accompanying documentation, including the phase one and hopefully a phase two, even better, then we're going to work with you and the consultants about making sure the requirements and the specifics, you know, to evaluate the appropriateness of the phase one and the validity of it. You can see on the slide there's a 1-year shelf life. It's only valid for 180 days, so you don't want to submit to us requests too far ahead of time. You want to make sure prior to closing it's as close as you can be and that it doesn't get stale, so to speak. And so knowing where your closing fits in and where our time frames come into play are very important. And so talking with us is what's the most important. So instead of just, I'm going to submit this, if you give us a call ahead of time and this is what you're hoping for, and just to make sure, manage everyone's expectations, I think that's the best way to move forward. So for those not familiar with the phase one, you can just see here, it's more of less of a record search. The interviews and looking at past uses. We're not talking about actual sampling, digging in the soil yet or anything like that. So this is a very important step. And what's also important, a lot of words, and like James says, I'm going to read these all to you, but no, I'm not. But when you're, depending on what kind of stakeholder you are and at what point of phase one might cross your desk and what you're looking at and trying to evaluate it, could be a lot of information. And so these are a lot of acronyms. And I just wanted to bring this up to show you some things that we would evaluate too as a program as to whether how we interpret it, and it could affect whether a comfort letter is issued or needs to be issued. So I don't want to get into all those details, but I just want you to be familiar that these are different kinds of terms that you might find in the phase one. There's some more terms in case you've heard of them or you read about them. If you have a phase one conducted for a property of interest, de minimis, I mean, what we're getting at is there a threat to human health and environment? And so that's the kind of recognized environmental conditions we're trying to see whether they are or not there. And some of the, when we say non-scope issues that are just a little bit off, they're important. There is contamination, we want to know about it, but it may or may not be in a phase one. And as asbestos and lead-based paint are important and need to be considered. And so that's something we would talk about with consultants and with you as a stakeholder. And we're just trying to make sure we're focusing on what are the potential threats to human health and environment. So this is all about the phase one. This is all about these latest slides about the due diligence portion of the BFPP liability defense. So just kind of be aware of that. And again, super important to keep that in mind prior to purchase. And so this slide is about the phase two. More or less the second part, the due care. So once you purchase the property, make sure what is required maybe by you. This is going to help with identify whether an ERC is necessary. And this is the sampling part. So again, those of you not necessarily familiar with these aspects of these kind of reports, this is where they may dig into the soil, they may do groundwater monitoring, they may do other kind of indoor air monitoring for vapor intrusion and other kind of contamination. And the program will evaluate consultants doing this phase two work and the reports and whether what the exposure routes are. And so all of that comes into play. And like I said, the more information we get, sooner than later, the better. And all of that is coupled with the comfort letter request. Then we have all that information, we've got a bigger picture, and we can move forward and work back and forth with all the stakeholders to make sure everyone's expectations are understood and you get what you need in the end. So I don't, again, since this is a broad audience, hopefully I'm not talking down to anyone with some of this basic information, but I just want to make sure everyone's kind of understanding that aspect as it relates to comfort letters, as it relates to ICs. So the ERC land use restrictions, this slide's important because it's significant that our program is the one drafted that drafts the ERCs that may be tied to the comfort letters. James did a good job explaining how it works on the item side and some of those programs, and we're just a little different this way. And so the process is a little bit different, but the concept is still the same. And I won't get into all of that and what they mean, but I think it's just also important to know, as you see the word restriction and, some people might freak out like, okay, now that means we can't do anything. Well, it actually just does help, maybe not, but it also helps tailor what kind of redevelopment might, can be done, and maybe just what things need to be in place in order to have a sustainable, successful redevelopment where you're still protective and you still are able to do what you need to do. So the restrictions can actually help with the reuse, maybe tailor it. And again, we try to work with so many stakeholders to make these projects move forward and make sure everyone understands them. So I think go ahead to the next, just a little bit about our timelines and process. Just again, knowing ahead of time that this is a process and it takes time. 120 days minimum is our usual time frame from when we get the request for comfort letter and all the supporting documentation. Or applied for it. There's a form, but there's also quite a bit of supplemental information, and all that's on our website. And again, just a phone call to us, we can help navigate some of that. But the length does depend on, this is a great workload for our program, the comfort letters. And so depending on how many are in the queue and what else is going on, and the complexity of the site, how much data, all of that factors into the timeline. So just being aware of that hopefully helps up at the front end. And this is something to note that, it is a liability defense that people can do on their own. It's self-implemented. Brownfield redevelopment happen across the state that don't necessarily involve our program. And hopefully it all works out. And we think we are value added and that we're giving an opinion that you did the right thing. You did the phase one correctly, you did it prior to purchase, and we're basically documenting that and interpreting the liability for you, which is value added. But if it helps to know, the comfort letter itself does not need to be in hand at the time of your transfer or closing. So that might alleviate some concerns, some frustrations, there are a lot of moving parts with any redevelopment, much less a brownfield one that has the environmental component associated with it. So we try to facilitate that as much as possible, and just know that that is an important part, that if you don't get the comfort letter at the time of closing, it's not the end of the world. So give you a little perspective there on that. Let's see. So the other letters, I only wanted to mention them outside of the comfort letters, just so you know that we offer them, but mostly that there can be ERCs related to them too. So I wanted to focus more or less on the liability interpretation letters, this legal assistance, but these are important letters too, certainly. And whether like one's more important than the other, it kind of depends on the site situation or the stakeholder. But the reasonable steps has become a letter that's important to, we need to revise revision to the ERC, and the closure letter, the site status letter, NFA letter, all important and can fit into the ERC, but I'm going to leave it at that. And if anyone has any questions, I can certainly get into more details, but it's easy to get into the weeds with all of these different kind of assistance and letters. But here's a snapshot just to give you a sense of the workload, how it breaks down for the different letters that I mentioned compared to the comfort letters. So used to say maybe one letter isn't better than another necessarily. It kind of depends on the situation, but really that is the comfort letters are the big ticket item. That is what people seem to want. It's what our big workload is. At the end of the day, people don't want to touch these brownfields often because they're concerned about the liability and costs. And so they come to us looking for comfort, looking for a comfort letter. So I want to conclude on a positive note. So I want to just briefly, there's so many really redevelopment success stories out there, and they can involve our program, as in they maybe just got a comfort letter and that was able to move them forward, or they got a whole mix of resources from our program or otherwise. And in this case, the former Aztec Crown Laundry site on the east side of Indianapolis is one that's been on the books for a while. It's had a whole mix of resources. Is a historical mess of a site, needed a lot of help, a lot of history to it. EPA helped with removals. There were several investigations. And when it came down to Indiana Brownfields program support, not only was there one comfort letter issued, but multiple letters issued at different times for different entities. And you can see, I mean, this is just to illustrate how our resources can, we can leverage our own resources and others, and one letter isn't necessarily mutually exclusive of another, and it's not linear necessarily. Sometimes financial assistance and other letter, legal assistance, technical assistance can all kind of come together, work in parallel structure or crossover. It's which is great because it provides a lot of flexibility. But for anyone who wants to know, it starts here and it ends here and very linear, just a heads up that it doesn't always work out that way. So again, managing expectations, knowing ahead of time how these projects can move forward through our program, maybe through other programs, us trying to be the coordinator along the way, might help to know, and that they can take time, and these redevelopments don't necessarily happen overnight, and all related to the planning, what you can do, when you can do it, and start to tailor how the redevelopment's going to go, and ultimately help developers with their unknowns, with their questions, concerns, and how they can work with the communities to make a good successful and sustainable redevelopment project. So as you can see at the end of the slide there, a total of 5 letters were issued just for this one property. So that's what it took, and that's what it took, and we were glad we were able to help with that. And we had some ERCs related to this. And again, it sounds like, oh, it's a restriction, we can't do this, we can't do that. And really we're just, as James said very well, we're just trying to eliminate exposure and help everyone. So may feel like, hands are being tied, but really it's trying to make environmental protection, environmental and economic stewardship, and have all of that come together in a nice package. So that's what it was. It was the Crown Laundry site with a big history. As I said, this next slide just shows the different phases of redevelopment for senior apartments. And as I mentioned, it's on the east side of Indianapolis, for those of you familiar with it, on Washington Street. And in 2016, there was a grand opening. And then 2019 had the second one, the Parker Place. So the Oxford Place and the Parker Place. And then as of 2019, they had planned for a third phase, which would include some retail, but at this time it's still pending. So we'll have more to report hopefully in the near future if we have yet another success on this one site. Let's see, make sure I'm covering all my points. Well, I'm already here to the contact information. And I will note that I think James mentioned it, that when the ERCs are for brownfields, when the ERCs on comfort letters or closure letters are recorded and come to us, we get the copy of them, then they are sent over to James' group and they put them in the IC registry. So again, just an example of where our program in partnership with IDEM and we work together to make sure that everything is transparent and people understand what they can do and what they can't do. So I have a feeling I kind of went through that very quickly. So that's all I have, unless you all have some questions.
We do have one question so far, Michelle.
Okay.
So if this is from Tracy McConnell. So if a comfort letter request is submitted and we know there will be a need for an ERC to restrict groundwater, we do not need to provide a draft ERC because IFA will prepare the ERC?
Correct. Right. We draft the ERCs in-house in our program. And obviously anything that is known ahead of time and can communicate with the project manager accordingly, will help us in crafting that and making sure all the necessary information is in there.
Okay. Are there other questions that you have for Michelle? Okay, I don't see any further questions coming in.
Okay, I can.
If you still have some questions and haven't yet asked those, go ahead and put them into the chat and we will have one more question and answer session at the end of the next session.
All right. And hopefully you are more comfortable with comfort letters, which was my goal a little bit. I know it's a lot of information, and if I can't answer the questions, there are other folks in the program I can certainly take the questions to who deal with the weeds of it all. And I'd be glad to get back with anyone, even if they come. My contact information is right there. So even after today's presentation, certainly feel free to contact me anytime.
Great. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thanks, Jennifer.
And now we will invite Tracy Barnes to present. And let me give you some background information on her. She is our newest CTAP member, Compliance and Technical Assistance Program member. And she has been with IDEM for over 30 years and a lot of great experience she has brought to our program here at CTAP. She began her IDEM career in the Office of Land Quality, and she currently serves as our RCRA land quality expert within the Compliance and Technical Assistance Program. She draws on her experience with waste characterization, storage, and disposal under Indiana's solid and hazardous waste rules. And she has worked with generators of a variety of industrial waste and to assist with determinations and other beneficial use and other areas, but she's worked with folks from foundry sands, coal combustion residues, iron and steel slag, tires and construction demolition waste to manage those, to look at how they're handling those. So Ms. Barnes has a Bachelor's of Science degree in biology from Purdue University and a certificate in public management from Indiana University's Graduate School of Public and Environmental Affairs. Thanks, Tracy. Take it away.
Thanks, Jennifer. See if I can share my screen. And let's see. I have one more thing to do. I've got a little video to share, so I need to make sure that I'm sharing my sound. Okay, it looks like I've got that on, so I'm ready to go. Anyway, thank you so much for attending today. This has been great fun. For those of you that know me, I like to talk. I won't be shy about it. But before I get into what I have to say about our compliance and technical assistance program, I do have a short video that I'd like you to see that I think really sums up what we do here pretty well. We'll get this going.
The Indiana Department of Environmental Management, also known as IDEM, is devoted to implementing federal and state regulations to protect Hoosier health and the environment. Environmental protection in Indiana has come a long way since the agency's establishment in 1986 and continues to make great strides. IDEM's Office of Program Support, or OPS, aids in the fulfillment of the agency's mission through collaboration, outreach, education, and assistance efforts, with focuses on pollution prevention, recycling, and technical compliance assistance. The Office of Program Support is committed to providing environmental assistance to citizens, communities, and businesses, promoting pollution prevention, supporting education and outreach initiatives, energizing recycling efforts in the state, and recognizing Hoosier environmental stewardship initiatives. OPS oversees 31 programs at IDEM. One of the unique programs offered by OPS is the Compliance and Technical Assistance Program, or CTAP. Whether you are a small business or a large corporation, CTAP can provide advice for environmental regulatory compliance needs. CTAP is a non-regulatory program at IDEM, and assistance is free and confidential. OPS leads the agency's 4 regional offices located in Valparaiso, South Bend, Brownstown, and Petersburg. OPS also administers the agency's health and safety program. Environmental education comes in various shapes and sizes, and the Office of Program Support is here to deliver. Whether you are searching for an expert to deliver a presentation to your classroom, or you are wanting information about general recycling, or electronic recycling, the Office of Program Support can assist you.
Sorry about that. That's my first venture into sharing a video online and embedded in a presentation. Anyway, so I'm going to step back and look more closely at the group that I work in, which is the section called Pollution Prevention and Compliance Assistance. We've already seen Jennifer several times today, but I thought I would just call her out as our fearless leader. We're glad to have her. And then there's me with my contact information. The Compliance and Technical Assistance Program offers free and confidential assistance, if you're not familiar. So, of course, it's free. Everything we provide is free. It's paid for by tax dollars, but it's also confidential. We have a state statute that actually guides us and prohibits us from sharing information. We take that very seriously. So I just want to assure you, anytime you contact us with any questions or inquiries, that's all going to be kept confidential. We're also non-regulatory in that We don't have enforcement ability. We don't cite violations or give you fees. So we're separate from the regulatory staff here at the agency. And we're also multimedia. We have experts in all of the media at IDEM. So, you know, if I don't know the answer, I definitely have a colleague that can assist. So we'll help you navigate, you know, whether you have a question about your air permit, about RCRA waste that you're generating, you know, or maybe it's a combination of things, but we will get you those answers. We have staff in each of the 4 regional offices, and you can see that the contact information there for them. Now, our support, we give prospective businesses, we help them navigate through their regulatory needs. So if it's a new business coming to Indiana, or maybe a business that's looking at expanding or changing up operations, you can contact us. And please do contact us ahead of time. We can help you navigate things. We may see things that you're not aware of, give you some suggestions on things. For example, we could give you an example of another similar permit. So those are some options. We have a lot of institutional knowledge we can share with you. We also have other programs of interest, including our voluntary programs, grants and partnerships. And we also do pollution prevention. So if you're looking at doing some pollution prevention, we can assist with that. It's really just a one-stop shop for a lot of different things. So how do we do that? Well, we have our hotline and our online portal. We go out in the field and do site assessments. We have training opportunities like the one today. And we also have a range of information online. So we have some online resources. You can contact us and get timely assistance with interpreting a rule or a permit requirement, figure out what your next steps are to obtain a permit or to modify processes. You can ask general environmental regulatory questions or compliance questions. And in fact, that's one of my favorite things is when the phone rings, I kind of joke that, you know, the thing is now the phone rings and like the Jerry Seinfeld skit, you know, don't answer it. Don't anybody answer it. Well, we kind of dive for the phone in the CTAP room because we never know what it's going to be. And we really like helping people. You can also request a site assessment. So we can come out to your site. You can go through our portal to submit your request for that. So, and I know our slide says the new CTAP portal, and I still call it the new portal. We've been using it for coming up on a year now, and we're still finding new features and making modifications to make it even more user friendly. So I guess it's going to be new for a while maybe, but it isn't that new. What you're going to do is you're going to create a secure account and submit confidential requests. You can get an assessment. You can track interactions. So one of the beauties of our portal is that when you ask us a question, we'll respond, but you can go back, similar to the portal you might use with your doctor. You can go back and find your test results. You can do the same thing here. You can go back and find those things. You can also invite collaborators. And I think that that's one feature that people aren't really taking advantage of as much as they could. So if you're a company, you can invite several staff members from your company to participate in the portal. And when somebody's on vacation, or, you know, sometimes they resign, you still have all of that information there available to you. And if you find yourself in the situation where you lost an employee or they're out of town for some period of time and you need to access the portal, you can contact us and we'll get the information to you. But if you set it up ahead of time, then you'll be ready to go. Consultants can also manage multiple clients because it is confidential. You can actually set up your inquiries for different clients and they will remain confidential. You can access them. You can invite your clients to participate in a particular inquiry. So it's a really great feature. And I think we haven't even touched on the collaboration features that we have so much. We'll get there. So the first thing that you'll want to do, if you haven't already, is establish an Access Indiana account. And this is the main page for Access Indiana. You can see the different agencies that are participating. Some examples are Department of Natural Resources, Homeland Security, Department of Revenue, just some different agencies that if you're not using them already, you may end up with an Access Indiana account just to access their features. At IDEM, we will be adding more programs. We'll be adding into the portal. I think CTAP might be it so far, but just watch for some future additions. So when you come into the portal, this is what it looks like. You're going to click on that link, and then you're going to go through and fill in the appropriate fields. I'm not going to go through that now. We have different tutorial videos out there that can walk you through that. If you're having any trouble, just give us a call. We'll walk you through it too. So I'd mentioned already that we do site assessments. It's a free on-site consultation to determine environmental regulatory obligations, compliance status. If you have any pollution prevention opportunities you'd like us to look at, we can do that. We can do these virtually. We can do them in person, whatever works for you, whether it's a focus, we really just want to look at one particular item, or maybe you'd like us to come in and give an overall assessment or audit of your site. We can do all of it. So we also offer training. And this is an example of one of the trainings that we offer, the E101 series. Now, if you go to the website, and I haven't mentioned it yet, but when we post these files to our website, we're recording today. We'll post the recording and PDFs of the slides here. All of the slides will have the links in there, so you'll be able to go find a slide and then click on the link if you like to access it that way. But anyway, our traditional E101 were focused on one particular media and going into a little bit more detail than what we've been doing with these online series that we're doing now. So you can go back, and I believe the AIR module is there and one other one. So that information is there, as well as all of the Zoom webinars that we've done. And we've done 5. This is the 5th one this year. And then we did one last year. So there's 6 of them there. We've got some more in the cooker. We have next on deck, we've got stormwater requirements. That'll be coming up in, I believe, early October. So watch for the email blast. We'll be sending that out. You can register for that. And again, you can also, after the event, you can also go back and refer back to it. But we like you to register and we like you to participate so we can answer your questions live. Also, when we're done, I will be sending out a survey, an email with a survey in it. If you have ideas for other presentations that you would like to see, please put those in there. Our online resources include sector-specific guidance, regulatory updates, training opportunities, and fact sheets, pollution prevention resources. There may be other upcoming events, and just additional information about CTAP. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and get out of CTAP and talk about some of our voluntary programs and other offerings that we have in the Office of Program Support. So we have 2 voluntary programs for businesses. The first one I'm going to talk about is the Indiana Partners for Pollution Prevention. If you're not familiar with it, it's a partnership organization comprised of industries, businesses, government agencies, and other entities that implement and promote P2 opportunities. It's a great chance to network, to have a continuous improvement and recognition opportunities. And our annual pollution prevention conference and trade show is coming up. It's September 23rd. If you haven't registered and you'd like to register and attend, registration is still open. So contact Jean Fix at the contact information at the bottom of the slide. The other voluntary program that we have is our environmental stewardship program. And we actually just opened the fall application round today. If you didn't get an email on that, contact us. We can forward information. So the environmental stewardship program is a little bit different. It's a performance-based leadership program designed to recognize and reward Indiana entities that exceed standards. So you're going to be going above and beyond, and there are ongoing commitments. So it's really, this is kind of the cream of the crop here, but it's a great group. And if you're interested, contact G. We also have pollution prevention grants, and I mentioned this in the last E101 that I did, and I think we mentioned it a couple times. There's just a few spots left. So if you've been kind of on the fence and thinking about signing up for this one, I'm going to encourage you to do so. There's a lot of benefits. You're going to get waste stream mapping assessments. You've got Purdue staff coming out and looking at your processes and making recommendations. So there's a lot of benefits. And if you had to pay a consultant to come and do this, it'd be a lot more expensive. The last grant I want to talk about is the Recycling Market Development Program grant. And those go anywhere from $50,000 up to $500,000. And it's a matching grant. The current application period is closed, and we're evaluating some of the applications that we got, looking at awarding those. But there will be a new round in spring of 2022, so you can watch for that. And there's my contact information. And I don't know if you have any questions for me or for any of the previous presenters.
I don't see any further questions. Does anyone have any other questions that you'd like to ask? We do have some additional time here. If you have any burning questions.
Yeah. Well, the good news is it was a lot of information. We finished up early. No one's going to complain about that. And, like I said, please watch for the email that I'll be sending. It will have your certificate too. So I plan on sending that before I leave today. So you get the survey and the certificate, and then the recording and the other files will be posted in about a week or so.
That's right. So again, we thank you for joining us today. We do have several more in the works for this year. We have a stormwater event on October 6th, and that is in the afternoon of October 6th. We will be hearing from Randy Braun, the person over all stormwater permits here at IDEM. So directly from the horse's mouth, so to speak, about industrial permits and a few of the general permits and construction permits. So, so please tune in to that with us. And we do invite you to complete the survey and provide us your feedback on today's presentation. It always helps us to improve the work that we're doing, and to also note if there's anything that you'd like to see later on this year or next year. We'd love to be able to put that together for you and present it. So thank you again for your time. And if there's no other questions, I don't see anything else, we will close for the day. Thank you so much to our presenters. We appreciate you. Have a great day.
Yep. Thanks, Jennifer.